Nkechi's eyes widened. What? Are you out of your mind? She could die. She will give birth naturally, Chike insisted, just like my mother did. Nkechi pleaded with him. Chike, please, think about Adaobi. Think about the baby. But Chike still insisted that there won't be any surgery. Adaobi sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the plain wall of her childhood room. The sound of her mother humming a hymn in the kitchen filled the air. She loved this house. Though small and cramped, it held all the memories of her childhood games, her father's laughter, and the struggles her family faced. Adaobi, hurry up. Your in-laws will be here soon, her mother called out, breaking her thoughts. Yes, Mama, she replied, trying to hide the nervousness in her voice. Today was a traditional marriage day, a day that should be filled with joy. But all she felt was a cold knot of fear twisting in her stomach. She was about to marry Chike, a wealthy businessman in the city where they lived. Though he lived in an opulent part of the city, while she and her family occupied a small house in a nearby slum. Her family was poor. Her father had passed away when she was just a little girl, leaving them with nothing but debts and struggles. Chike had come into their lives like a savior. He offered to pay off their debts and take care of her family. In return, she had to marry him. Her family had been overjoyed and she had agreed, believing it was the least she could do for them. She had met Chike barely 6 months ago while hawking fruits. She was exhausted and resting under the shade of a tree by the roadside when Chike saw her. Fine girl, why are you sitting here all alone? Is everything all right? He had asked on sighting Adaobi while walking towards his car that fateful evening. That simple conversation brought about an event that would change her life forever. They became very good friends. Chike was nice to her from the beginning, which soon endowed him to her family and siblings. He would often shower them with gifts and not hesitate to give them money whenever they asked, and sometimes even without asking. Soon afterwards, Chike started proposing marriage, which was not in Adaobi's agenda for the moment. She had wanted to further her education. You know how difficult it has been for us ever since your father died, thundered her mother when she insisted on furthering her education instead of getting married at the moment. Chike is a good man. He is rich and kind. He loves you and has been very supportive to our family. If he says he wants to marry you, you should be happy and dancing around, not this thing you are doing. On our own, we can barely feed without Chike's support. Where do you expect us to get the money for you to use in furthering your education? Her mother went further, trying to make her to understand. But Mama, no buts. Her mother cut her short and wouldn't let her argue further. When you finally get married to Chike, you can always further your education from your husband's house. I will talk to him and I'm sure he will gladly accept. He's marrying you because he loves you so much. And I don't want you to waste this opportunity that God has given us freely. She went further and further, trying to make Adaobi see reasons. As the traditional marriage ceremony began, Adaobi looked at her mother, who gave her an encouraging nod. You are doing the right thing, my daughter, her mother had whispered. Adaobi tried to smile, but her heart was heavy. When the vows were exchanged, Chike's grip on her hand was firm, almost too firm. She glanced up at him and caught a flicker of something in his eyes like possessiveness. She brushed the thoughts aside. Maybe it was just nerves, she thought. But as soon as the ceremony ended, Chike's behaviors changed. He no longer spoke softly to her. His tone became commanding. Adaobi, make sure you don't embarrass me in front of my friends, he whispered sharply during the reception. His grip tightening on her arm, Adaobi nodded silently, unsure of what she had gotten herself into. The guests danced, the music played, and everyone celebrated, but Adaobi's smile was forced. She was stepping into a life that already felt like a prison. A few months into the marriage, Adaobi found herself more isolated than ever. Chike was not the kind of man he pretended to be. He would often belittle her, reminding her daily of how he had rescued her from poverty. "You should be grateful, Adaobi," he would say, comparing her to his wife's friends who were apparently more obedient, more elegant, and more everything. One afternoon, Adaobi's only friend, Nkechi, visited. Nkechi was different. She was bold, outspoken, fiercely independent. She had always supported Adaobi, offering words of comfort whenever she felt down. "Ada, you look so pale. Are you okay?" Nkechi asked, concerns etched on her face. Adaobi tried to smile but felt tears well up in her eyes. "I'm fine, Nkechi," she replied softly, looking away to hide the bruises on her arm from where Chike had hit her the previous night. Nkechi wasn't convinced. "Are you sure? You know you can talk to me," she insisted. Adaobi hesitated, glancing at the door to make sure Chike wasn't coming in. "He doesn't like it when you visit too often," she whispered. Nkechi's eyes narrowed. "Why? What have I done to him?" she said, almost flaring up. He thinks you might be putting ideas into my head," Adaobi confessed. Nkechi sighed. "Ada, you need to learn to stand up for yourself. Don't let him control you like this. You deserve better than this," she said angrily. Adaobi nodded, but deep inside, fear consumed her. She was enduring everything for the sake of her family. Chike had warned her against so many things. She loved Nkechi, but she didn't want more trouble, so she had to find the courage to tell her this heartbreaking news. That evening, Chike discovered Nkechi still visited after his warning and instructions. He fled into rage. "I told you not to let that friend of yours come here again," he shouted. His voice echoed through the house. "She's my friend, Chike. She only came to see how I was doing," Adaobi replied, trying to stay calm. "I don't care. I don't want to see her here again," he yelled. Adaobi nodded, her heart racing. She was trapped with nowhere to turn. Despite his harsh words, Nkechi continued to visit, sometimes bringing homemade foods or small gifts for Adaobi. "I won't abandon you," Nkechi would say, no matter what he says. Over time, her visit became more frequent, which only increased Chike's anger. One day, after another of Nkechi's visits, he grabbed Adaobi by the arm. "This is the last time I will say it. She's not welcome here anymore. If I see her here again, you will regret it," he threatened. Adaobi was terrified but nodded. She knew Nkechi meant well, but Chike's threats were becoming more intense and she needed to apply caution. This made her call Nkechi and related the news to her again amidst tears. One would have thought Chike's madness ended with Nkechi, but unknown to her, she was yet to see the most. He had equally warned her never to allow any of her family step foot into his home again. This didn't sit well with Adaobi, and she couldn't bring herself to tell her family such, especially her mother. But something happened that made her wished she had. One afternoon, Adaobi's mother traveled from the lower part of the city to visit her daughter. She had not seen Adaobi since the wedding and had saved up to make the long journey. She knocked eagerly on the door, a smile on her withered face. "Mama," Adaobi exclaimed when she saw her mother at the doorstep. She rushed to embrace her, but hesitated when she remembered Chike's rule. "I'm so happy to see you," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder nervously. Come in," Adaobi said. But before her mother could step inside the house, Chike appeared in the doorway, his face cold and hard. "What is she doing here?" he asked, his voice low and threatening. "She's my mother, Chike. She came all the way to see us," Adaobi pleaded. Chike smirked. "I don't care. I don't want beggars in my house. Tell her to leave now," he commanded. Adaobi's heart sank. "Chike, please, just let her stay, even if it's just for the night," she begged. "I said no. She's not welcome here," he shouted even louder. Adaobi's mother, overhearing the exchange, felt her heart break. "It's okay, my daughter. I will come back another time," she said softly, her eyes filled with tears. "No, Mama, please." Adaobi's voice trailed off as her mother turned and walked away. Her shoulders slumped. Adaobi watched her go, feeling utterly helpless but could do nothing. She cried all night. Things continued this way until one day, Adaobi discovered she was pregnant. The news should have brought joy, but Adaobi was filled with dread. She knew Chike would not be pleased. When she finally gathered the courage to tell him, his reaction was cold and dismissive. Pregnant? So what? Pregnancy is no excuse to be lazy, he muttered, barely looking up from his phone. Adaobi tried to hide her disappointment. Chike, it's our first child, and so what? He harshly interrupted her. Just make sure you keep the house in order. My food better be ready when I get home. And no slacking in the name of pregnancy, he continued without any emotion in his tone. Adaobi nodded, tears threatening to spill over. As her pregnancy progressed, Chike's demands grew harsher. He insisted she cooked his favorite meals of pounded yam and egusi late at night, even when she was exhausted. One night, after struggling to prepare dinner, Adaobi felt a sharp pain in her abdomen. She leaned against the kitchen counter, clutching her stomach. The baby kicked fiercely and she winced, trying to steady her breathing. Chike stormed into the kitchen. What is taking so long? I'm hungry, he commanded. I'm trying, Chike, she stammered, wiping sweat from her forehead. Try harder, he sneered. Pregnancy isn't an illness. My mother had 8 children and never complained. Adaobi continued to endure hard chores and constant insult. She silently prayed for strength, hoping that things would change after the baby was born. 9 months quickly came, and Adaobi's labor pain began in the early hours of the morning. She clutched her belly, feeling the contractions grow stronger. Chike, I think it's time, she whispered, trying to keep her voice steady. Chike, half asleep, glanced at her and frowned. What do you mean time? I'm in labor. We need to go to the hospital, she managed to say in between breath. Chike scoffed. Hospital? Why? Women give birth at home all the time. My mother gave birth to all of us at home. Adaobi's pain intensified. Please, Chike, I'm scared. I need help, she pleaded. Chike shook his head. You will give birth here, just like every other woman I know does it. You are not special, Adaobi, he said, and covered his head on the bed. The pain became unbearable, and Adaobi's breathing grew shallow. Her body trembled with each contraction. Hours passed, and Chike continued to ignore her cries. Take her to the hospital for God's sake, one neighbor shouted through the window. But Chike was resolute. Mind your own business, he shouted back, slamming the window shut. Finally, after hours of agony, Chike noticed that Adaobi's condition was worsening. Her eyes was pale, her lips dried, and her eyes looked distant. Fine, he snapped. I will take you to the hospital, but this is the last time you will embarrass me this way, he said. At the hospital, doctors quickly assessed Adaobi's situation. She needs an emergency C-section, one of them explained. She's too weak to deliver naturally, and the baby is in distress. Chike's face darkened. No, my wife will deliver naturally, like every other woman I know, he declared. Sir, please understand, the doctor continued. Without this operation, both mother and child could die. Chike insisted on no operation. Do your job and deliver the baby naturally, he commanded. Everyone in the hospital tried to reason with him. Nurses, doctors, and even other patients pleaded with him to reconsider, but he was firm. Meanwhile, Nkechi received a frantic call from one of the neighbors who had heard about Adaobi's condition. She rushed to the hospital, her heart racing with fear. When she arrived, she saw Chike standing outside the delivery room, his arms crossed, looking angry. She ran to him, her face pale with worry. Chike, what is going on? How is Adaobi? She asked almost immediately. She's fine, Chike replied briefly. They want to do some unnecessary surgery, but I said no. Nkechi's eyes widened. What? Are you out of your mind? She could die. She will give birth naturally, Chike insisted, just like my mother did. Nkechi pleaded with him. Chike, please, think about Adaobi. Think about the baby. But Chike still insisted that there won't be any surgery. Nkechi's frustration grew. She knew she had to act quickly. She pushed past Chike and ran into the delivery room. "Doctor, please, save my friend," she shouted. The doctors, sensing the urgency, decided to act. They prepared Adobe for the C-section, ignoring Chike's protest. After hours of intense effort, the operation was finally done and successful. Adobe and the baby were both safe, but Adobe remained unconscious for several hours. When she finally woke up, she saw Nkechi sitting beside her, holding her hand. "Ada, you are okay. Thank God," Nkechi whispered, tears streaming down her face. Adobe smiled weakly. "Thank you so much, Nkechi. You saved my life," she said amidst tears. Chike entered the room, his face a mask of anger. "How dare you go against my wishes?" he shouted at Nkechi. "You almost killed her, and here you are talking," Nkechi shouted back, her voice shaking with emotion. "You don't deserve her. You don't deserve her at all, and you will surely pay for it," she added. Chike glared at them both and stormed out of the room. Adobe felt a mix of relief and fear. She knew things would never be the same again. Days passed and Adobe recovered slowly. Chike did not visit her again, but Nkechi was by her side every day. After she was discharged from the hospital, Adobe settled into Nkechi's small apartment, which, though modest, felt like a sanctuary. For the first time in years, she felt safe. She stared at her newborn daughter, cradled in her arms, and whispered, "I promise I will give you a better life." The baby goggled and Adobe smiled, a real smile. "I'm so proud of you, Ada," she said softly, sitting beside her. "You did it. You found your courage," she said. Adobe nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. "I should have listened to you earlier, Nkechi. I should have left him a long time ago," she said amidst tears. Nkechi placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You are here now, and that's what matters. You have a future, and your daughter will know what love and strength look like," she said, trying to encourage her. Adobe's mother visited and helped with the new mother and child, and everything seemed to be going back to normal again. But then, like a shadow that never leaves, Chike began to show up at Nkechi's house, begging to see Adobe and their baby. The first time he came, Nkechi opened the door just a crack enough to see his face, but did not let him inside. "Nkechi, please," Chike pleaded, his voice sounding strained. "I just want to see my wife and my child. I have changed, I swear," he said. Nkechi's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Chike, you need to leave. Adobe doesn't need you around. You have done enough damage already," she would say whenever Chike came begging. But Chike kept coming back. Every few days, he would show up, looking more messy. Each time, his pleas growing more desperate. Nkechi stood firm, refusing to let him in. She didn't even bother telling Adobe about his visit at first. However, Chike's persistence wore on Nkechi's nerves, and eventually Adobe overheard one of their exchanges from her room. One afternoon, Adobe asked Nkechi, "Why do you keep sending him away?" Nkechi sighed, leaning against the kitchen counter. "He's no good, Adobe. You know that. He will only cause more trouble," she said. Adobe bit her lip, conflicted. I just need to hear what he has to say, Nkechi. Maybe he really has changed. Maybe he deserves a chance to explain," she said amidst conflicted emotions. Nkechi's face tightened with anger. "Explain what? How he treated you like trash? How he nearly let you die during childbirth?" Adobe looked down, unsure of her own feelings. "I don't know. I just want to understand why he treated me that way. Maybe he's truly sorry," she said again. Nkechi sighed, but eventually nodded. "Fine. You are an adult, Adobe. If you want to hear him out, I won't stop you. But don't say I didn't warn you," she said, almost angry, and walked away. The next time Chike came, Nkechi grudgingly let him in. Adobe sat on the edge of the sofa, holding her baby close. her heart racing in her chest. When Chike entered, he immediately fell to his knees in front of her, tears streaming down his face. "Adobe, please," he sobbed. "I know I was wrong. I treated you terribly, but I have changed. I promise I have changed. I just want to see my daughter, to be a part of her life. Please forgive me," he begged. Adobe looked at him, her emotions twisting in confusion. She saw the sincerity in his eyes, the desperation in his voice. She wanted to believe him, coupled with the fact that her mother has been calling and begging her to forgive him and give him a second chance. Chike began visiting more regularly, bringing gifts for Adobe and Chiamaka. He would bring diapers, baby clothes, and sometimes food. Nkechi watched these exchanges with suspicions, always staying nearby, ready to step in if Chike showed any sign of his old self. One day, after Chike had left, Nkechi confronted Adobe. "You really believe he's changed, don't you?" Nkechi asked, crossing her arms. Adobe sighed, cradling her baby. "I don't know, Nkechi. Maybe he's sincere. He seems different and softer. And Chiamaka deserves a father, doesn't she?" Nkechi shook her head. "Not all fathers are good, Adobe. Just because he's her father doesn't mean he deserves to be in her life," she advised. But Adobe's heart began to soften with each visit. Chike seemed genuine, and the gifts, though modest, were thoughtful. She started to think about going back. Nkechi could see the change in Adobe's behavior and grew increasingly worried. One afternoon, Chike came over, and after spending some time with the baby, he turned to Adobe, his voice trembling with emotion. "Adobe, please come back home. I have changed, I promise. I want us to be a family again. I will treat you with the respect and love you deserve," he said. Adobe hesitated, glancing at Nkechi, who shook her head negatively. But Adobe, blinded by Chike's newfound tenderness and the thought of giving her daughter a father, whispered, "Maybe I should, Nkechi. Just give him one more chance," she pleaded. Nkechi's face darkened with frustration. "Adobe, don't be foolish. He's manipulating you." Adobe sighed. "Nkechi, I have to try." Reluctantly, Nkechi agreed to support Adobe's decision, though she made it clear she did not approve. "Just know that my door is always open," Nkechi said quietly and walked away. 2 days later, Adobe returned to Chike's house with a heart full of hope and a small suitcase in hand. At first, everything seemed perfect. Chike was attentive, affectionate, and seemed genuinely happy to have her back. He helped with the baby, bought groceries, and even surprised Adobe with small gifts. However, the peace was short-lived. One afternoon, Chike came back home from work and found the house in disarray. He spotted a few dishes in the sink and some toys scattered on the floor. His mood shifted instantly. "What is this?" he shouted, glaring at Adobe. "Is this how you keep the house now?" Adobe, holding the baby, tried to explain. "Chike, please. Chiamaka has been sick. She has been crying all day. I haven't had the time to clean," she said, trying to make him to understand. Chike's face twisted with anger. "So now you are making excuses because you are the first to give birth? My mother gave birth to 8 children and she never let the house look like this." He lunged forward and slapped Adobe before she could say anything further, sending her crashing against the wall. Adobe gasped, clutching the baby tightly. Tears filled her eyes, but she said nothing, swallowing her pain and fear. Days turned into weeks, and Chike's behavior grew worse. He began to bring his friends over unannounced, forcing Adobe to cook and serve them late into the night. Sometimes, he even brought his mistresses home, openly humiliating her by asking her to leave the room for them. Adobe was too ashamed to tell anyone, not even Nkechi. She remembered Nkechi's warnings and felt too embarrassed to admit that she had been wrong to return to Chike. One evening, after another violent outburst, Adobe decided to talk to Chike, hoping to find a way to make him see reasons. "Chike, we need to talk," she began cautiously. Chike glared at her, his voice cold. Talk about what? He asked with an unconcerned tone. About how you have been treating me. I thought you said you have changed. This isn't what I came back for. Chike's face twisted with rage. So now you are going to lecture me in my own house? You think you are better than me now? Adobe stood her ground, her voice trembling. No, Chike, I just want us to have peace. For Chiamaka's sake. Chike exploded in anger before she could finish, slapping her hard across the face. Adobe staggered, and in a moment of chaos, she fell, hitting her head against the corner of a table. She laid still, her breathing shallow. Chike sneered, thinking she was faking it. Get up, Adobe. Stop this drama. You are not fooling anyone. He backed, but Adobe did not move. Hours passed and she remained motionless. Chike began to panic, but his pride stopped him from checking on her, and he drove out without care or concern. The next morning, Nkechi felt an uneasy sensation in her spirit. She tried calling Adobe severally, but there was no answer. Growing increasingly worried, she decided to check up on her friend. She rushed over to Chike's house and knocked on the door. When there was no response, she pushed the door open and found Adobe lying on the floor, unresponsive, and Chiamaka crying beside her. Adobe, Adobe, Nkechi screamed, rushing to her side, shaking her gently, then more desperately. When there was no response, Nkechi's heart sank. She called an ambulance and they rushed her to the hospital, but it was too late. Adobe had passed away hours earlier. Nkechi's heart shattered. She blamed herself for allowing Adobe go back to Chike. With tears streaming down her face, she reported the incident to the police and Adobe's family. Chike, realizing the gravity of what he had done, fled and went into hiding. The police launched a search, and after a few days, they found him hiding in a run-down hotel, trembling with fear. He was arrested and charged with manslaughter. Nkechi, devastated but determined to keep Adobe's memories alive, took in baby Chiamaka with the permission of Adobe's family. She vowed to raise the child with love and to teach her about the strength and courage her mother had shown, even in the face of adversity. Adobe's mother and siblings regretted their action of pressuring her into marriage against her will and also making her to return to an abusive partner. But regret, they say, is a heavy weight that doesn't change the past, and also that what has happened cannot be undone, but we can only learn from it.
Thank you so much for watching. Please like and leave a comment letting us know what you think about the story. Kindly subscribe if you are yet to do so. Up until next time, bye for now. Mwah.